friends, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name's Han and I'm a hand embroidery artist. I make a lot of embroidery tutorials, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how to embroider dates on the back of Converse sneakers. I think I use a different technique to a lot of other embroidery artists, so I'm really excited to show you this tutorial. It has been super highly requested. I know that this kind of project is really popular with brides and people who like to DIY gifts and such, so I hope that you guys find this video helpful. So in order to do this tutorial yourself at home, you're going to need a pair of Converse sneakers. I always recommend the Converse All-Star Canvas sneaker. Don't go with a leather sneaker for this kind of embroidery project. It's really hard to embroider on leather, so stick with the canvas shoes, especially for an intricate project like this. I'm using these monochrome white chucks because these are super popular with brides, and you're going to need to unlace these Converse sneakers. I do recommend that you take the laces all the way out, but I'm just a little bit lazy and I like to just tuck them away right at the end of the sneaker, but I would advise just taking them all the way out just to be safe. Then tuck the tongue underneath the toe cap of the shoe just to keep that out of the way as well. It's surprisingly easy to accidentally embroider onto the laces or the tongue of the shoe. Ask me how I know. I'm now going to be running through all of these supplies that you'll need to complete this project at home. As always, I will have all of these supplies linked in the description below in case you want to grab any of them and try this project yourself. So first up, you're going to need some embroidery needles. The brand of these does not matter. I do like these DMC needles, but to be honest, they're exactly the same as the no brand needles, and you get 30 needles in the no brand pack, and I'm pretty sure it's the same price as the DMC pack where you get 12 needles. Next up, you will need a pair of scissors. Any pair of scissors will do if you only have kitchen scissors at home. I do like my scissors really small and sharp so I can get really close to the embroidery inside the shoe and snip off any excess thread, but again, you can use any scissors that you have lying around at home. You are definitely going to need some finger protectors for this project. The spines of Converse shoes are often quite thick and it can be quite hard on your fingertips to embroider this area, so you are 100% going to need some finger protectors. I like to use these silicone ones. You can also get leather ones or metal thimbles. Either way, use something to protect the skin on your fingertips. I especially love these silicone ones because they give you a little bit of extra grip when you are pulling the needle up through the fabric, and I use them every single day when embroidering shoes. Next up, you're going to need something to write the date onto the spines of the shoes. I personally like to use a really thin pencil, but if you don't feel confident drawing onto the shoes with pencil, you can use an erasable embroidery marker. Pencil is much harder to get off of the shoe if you do make a mistake or place the date somewhere that you don't want it to be embroidered. And lastly, you are going to need some embroidery thread. Today I'm going to be using a metallic silver thread. You don't have to use this kind of thread if you want to use a different color for your own shoes. That's totally fine. I would honestly caution you away from using metallic thread. It's a little bit harder to handle and it's much more prone to knotting. This particular thread has 3 smaller strands that make up the one large strand, and I just want one of these smaller strands, so I'm going to split away one of the strands and then thread that onto my needle. This is going to make my numbers very delicate and very precise looking. They're going to look really nice and clean. Splitting your thread up into smaller sections is the key for really clean looking embroidery. Don't forget to knot the end of your thread before you start stitching. This is just going to make sure it doesn't go anywhere once you've made your initial stitch into the shoes. Next, I'm going to take my really fine line pencil and start sketching out the date onto the spine of the shoes. It's really important to press very lightly with this pencil. You don't want really thick, dark pencil marks on the shoe. This is really more so just a guide for where you want the thread to go. You shouldn't be pressing hard with the pencil at all into the fabric. And again, you can use an erasable embroidery marker for this step, and I definitely recommend that, especially if this is one of your first ever embroidery projects. Okay, it is time to start stitching, but don't forget to put your finger protectors on. This is definitely a must. So for this specific day, I'm embroidering onto the backs of these bridal shoes. I'm starting off with a 4, which is a super easy number to start off with. Numbers 1, 4, and 7 are the easiest numbers to embroider because they're just straight lines. It gets a little bit more challenging when you have to embroider curves, basically all of the other numbers that aren't 1, 4, and 7. So I'm just using really basic straight stitches for all of the lines that make up the number 4. For the easy numbers like 1, 4, and 7, you can basically just embroider them as if you are writing them. Once you're done with your 4, you should have something like this. And now we're going to move on to some of the harder numbers. And this is where I think my technique differs from a lot of other embroidery artists. Most embroidery artists opt to do a lot of really tiny back stitches when they're embroidering numbers. When I have to embroider numbers that have a curve in them, I like to use the couch stitch. It's kind of hard to explain, but you can see it pretty clearly clearly here on the video, I make one large stitch and then I couch that where I want the apex of the curve to be, which basically just means I make a small anchor stitch where I want the top of the curve to be, and then I go back in and I add some more tiny little anchor stitches where I want the curve to sit on the fabric. I really like using this method and I haven't seen any other embroidery artists use it, but I don't want to toot my own horn or anything, but I think my numbers turn out almost perfect every single time. And if I'm being honest, I don't love the way that numbers look when they have been embroidered with a bunch of tiny little back stitches. Next, we're moving on to another really difficult number, which is the number 6, which is basically just all curves. Again, I'm using my couch stitch method. And another thing to note about this method, don't be afraid to go in with your needle and kind of gently pull the thread around a little bit to exactly where you want it to be just before you anchor it. If you want the thread to go further to the left or further to the right, you can just move it around a little bit with the edge of your needle, and then you can anchor it in the exact place where you want the curve to be. So for the number 6, I'm actually making 3 separate stitches. I'm doing the top little antenna, and then I split the bottom circle of the stitch into 2 little arches that I anchor with small stitches. As I'm explaining it now with my words, it sounds really complicated, but I feel like you'll be able to see exactly what I'm doing on the video. And once you have this technique down, you can basically embroider all of the more difficult curvier numbers. And don't be afraid to add in as many anchor stitches as you want. Sometimes it's necessary to add in quite a few to make the curve as perfect as possible. And then we're going to move on to the year at the bottom of the date. We're going to do another 2, and I'm just going to show you again how I do the couch stitch for the number 2. And then we're going to move on to the number 5, which is another difficult number. So for the belly of the 5, there really is no other way to explain that. I guess I could say the curve of the bottom of the number 5. We're going to do another couch stitch. For this one, you might need quite a few little anchor stitches. I like to anchor it on the apex of the belly and then the bottom and the top of the belly for a perfect number 5 shape. Again, don't be afraid to pull your thread around a little bit and get it exactly where you want it before making those anchor stitches. This is what you should be left with after embroidering the day, month, and year on the back of your shoes. Obviously, your date might look different to this one. I'm just going to show you quickly how I tie off and secure my thread inside the shoes. I like to make at least 2 to 3 knots, and I do this just by looping my needle inside the fabric on the inside of the shoes a couple of times, and then making 2 or 3 knots in exactly the same fashion. Try and make these as neat as possible and keep them as close to the fabric as possible before moving on to the next step of this project. So now I'm going to go in and separate another strand of thread away from that larger group of strands. And this time, instead of just using that one strand, I'm actually doubling it up. So I'm bringing both ends of the thread together on the opposite end from the needle, and I'm knotting them together. So I'm basically doubling up that thread. It'll be twice as thick as the thread I used to embroider the numbers. I'm doing this because now we're going in and embroidering the hearts in between the numbers we embroidered for the dates. I'm using these hearts as little periods, little separators between the day, month and year. You can sketch out little heart shapes if you want to, if it'll make it easier for you to get the shapes right. I like to think of these little hearts as tiny little letter V's, and they're super easy to embroider. You just start at the top of one side of the heart and embroider down to the very bottom part of the heart, just using a regular straight stitch, and you do 2 back stitches on either side of the heart and it's done. It is such a simple, easy stitch, and by doubling the thread like this, they get nice and plump without having to go over and over those same stitches. Once you're done with that first heart, go back in and do exactly the same thing, remembering to add 2 back stitches over each side of the heart. And once you're done, you should have something that looks a little bit like this. Don't forget to tie off and secure your thread inside of the shoe before moving on to whatever other embroidery you want to add onto the shoes. I think this might be one of my favorite embroidery tutorials I've ever shared with you guys. It is such a cute DIY project, and it can turn something into the perfect keepsake or gift. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you did find it helpful, please let me know in the comments. I'm also open to any kind of embroidery tutorial requests, so please let me know what else you would like to see from me in the comments. If you haven't already, I would so appreciate it if you would like this video. It definitely helps me out with the YouTube algorithm gods. If you like embroidery tutorials and small business related content, you might want to consider subscribing to this channel. I make a lot of that over here, and I have some really fun videos planned for the next couple of months. Thank you again so much for watching, especially if you got into the end. I will see you guys in my next tutorial.